In the summer of 2022, we moved into an empty apartment in the Bavarian countryside. For the next 3.5 years, I've slowly chipped away at every corner to turn this empty space into a home. Let's start from the very beginning. We got the keys a few weeks before the official move-in date and took some time measuring every nook and cranny of the space in order to design our IKEA kitchen. In Germany, it's common for rental apartments to come without a kitchen, so new tenants would usually build their own. The overall renting culture in Germany is pretty unique. I'll explain more in the comments if you would like to learn more about it. We used the IKEA kitchen planner and met with an IKEA designer to finalize the layout. 6 weeks later, in the middle of June, the parts were delivered.
We have a kitchen!
We had decided to pay for professional installation of the main units, mostly to ensure that the water and electrics will be handled safely since we lack experience in those areas. Between the appliances, cabinets, and labor costs, we spent about 5,000 euros. To save where we could, we decided to build the kitchen island ourselves.
I know a place where we can go and be alone.
To be completely honest, it was more difficult than we had expected, and it took us 2 whole days to finish building this island.
Where we gonna go?
The cabinets and drawers totaled up to about 1.3k, which felt like a fortune at the time, but almost 4 years later, the island has been the most used surface in our home, but still looks and functions as well as it had on day one. By this point, we had already spent over 6,000 euros on the kitchen, so I opted for a simpler design above the counter. I installed some inexpensive shelves from the hardware store and used a washable paint for the backsplash. These were both affordable interim solutions that ended up staying for over 1.5 years. We also spray painted an old rod that we already had to fill up an empty corner and hung the new ceiling light to create the first version of our dream kitchen.
Golden days drifting far away. Light is leaving town. Colors fade, but I'm thinking we stay too.
At the start of 2024, I finally committed to the aesthetic I had been envisioning. Solid oak shelves from a local carpenter. We've never regretted not getting upper cabinets because we wanted the kitchen to feel really open due to the overall layout, and I'm too short to reach them either way. I also thought long and hard about whether or not to tile the backsplash, but ultimately decided to go with the lower effort route of using peel and stick tiles. The dilemma though was that the walls were bare and peel and stick would rip off the walls, which would be a pain to patch. My solution to that was to install some thin sheets of MDF using pin nails that make it really easy to remove, and then apply the peel and stick on them.
Summer nights, watch them go by as we fight off the cold. Holding you tight, you know just what I'm thinking. Don't want this moment to go. No, I don't.
With a new kitchen, we now needed a place to actually sit and eat. We chose the furniture pretty quickly for this space, a large farmhouse-style dining table and these fun-shaped spindle chairs. I've never mentioned it before, but the first attempt at painting this wall was a complete fail. I had chosen this light beige color that I thought was perfect, but after 5 hours and 2 coats of paint, it still looked exactly like the white wall I started with.
In the sun, it looks completely white, like this patch here.
After getting over my frustrations, I got a new can of paint, this time in a light taupe.
This summer I'll be by your side.
For storage, we turned back to our familiar friend, IKEA. We picked out some Besta cabinets because they seemed to be the easiest to hang on the walls. We got a single and a double unit and hung them high enough to avoid blocking the wall vent. To make the Besta cabinets look like one solid cabinet, I got some MDF sheets to wrap around them. Since they are raw MDF, I had to prime them first, wait 24 hours before lightly sanding, and then I could attach them to the Besta and paint them.
I'm looking out, it's really far. I found a tingle in my heart. Sun has set, the stars will appear.
For the doors, I got the Humveeken shaker doors and painted only the edges. I wanted to add some beautiful textured wallpaper that I had found at my local hardware store. This was a super easy DIY that took less than an afternoon to complete, but had upgraded the look of the cabinet so much.
Somewhere life goes on, the stars we know are gone. Can you let you be?
To finish the first version of our dining room, we hung some brass curtain rods and added sheer curtains to them. Over a year went by and we realized that we were still lacking in storage space, and the dining room had a lot of potential to add more storage. It felt like the stars aligned when a custom shelving system I had been eyeing went on a 40% discount. I bit the bullet and placed an order, expecting it to arrive just before we brought Juno the puppy home. Quite disappointingly, 6 weeks of expected delivery time turned into 15 weeks. This was also when Juno got her first taste of the DIY life. Be careful. Yes, good girl. Good girl.
Only fair that I should do my share of waiting. You've had your turn, now I'll take my dose of patience. Take all the time you need, but I can't watch you leave without giving you the rest of me.
The last thing I did was to put up some window film. This decision was pretty controversial with my viewers, but we are happy to say that it was the right decision for us. We still have the sheer curtains hanging on the other wall for a light and airy feel, but the window film on this side provides full privacy, blocks out a lot of the heat during the summer months, while still allowing in enough sunlight for the houseplants.
Hey, I love talking on the phone. But hey, I just can't wait to have you home.
The entryway was quite a fun room to tackle because of all the challenges it served. It was also one of the first rooms where I had properly begun using Milanote to organize all my thoughts and design ideas. In fact, Milanote ended up being an irreplaceable tool for me when designing the rest of our home. If you haven't heard of Milanote, it is the tool for visual organization, and best of all, it's entirely free to use. I started off by creating a new board. I named this one Entryway and chose a cute logo for it. Then you can choose from a bunch of different templates to suit your needs, or start from a blank canvas like what I usually like to do. To guide myself in making the best design choices, I usually start by creating a column of needs and wants. Needs derive from the main problems of the space. For example, our shoes were beginning to pile up and block the entryway, so we really needed some proper shoe storage. Wants, on the other hand, refer to more wish list type items that may not necessarily solve a problem, but could help the space feel more like a cozy home. For example, I wanted a bench to sit on while wearing shoes, and we had this weird nook in our entryway that would have made the perfect cozy spot. So I took a picture of it, dropped it straight into Milanote, and began drawing my ideas on it using the draw function. This draw function is available on both desktop and tablet, but obviously I find it much easier to draw with a proper stylus. I decided on 3 main features for the bench. I wanted a bench seating with some storage, a large artwork to cover the weird cutout on the wall that was actually the vent panel that we would only need to access once a year, and a pendant light to fill this space up. Within Milanote, I organized every aspect of the room makeover process, such as the DIY to-do list. This was a smaller scale project, so it was a simple list of tasks. For bigger woodworking projects, I like to make a huge DIY task board filled with inspiration images, materials and tools I need, measurements, building steps, and even things like color and hardware options. I also like to use the mobile app that instantly syncs to the desktop version, which is really handy to refer to while shopping for materials or during the actual DIY process. Lastly, I would usually create a mood board just to see if everything comes together. I'll save the images using the web clipper and then crop them directly in Milanote. I love how everything is organized all in one place, and like I said before, Milanote is absolutely free to use with no time limit. If you're interested to try it out for yourself, you can sign up today using my link in the description box, and a big thank you to Milanote for sponsoring today's video. With a solid design plan ready, I put on my DIY hat next. To create that cozy bench nook with storage, I bought a Besta drawer from IKEA. But to make it a comfortable seating height, I had to first build a simple base to lift it up, and I did this by using some countersunk pilot holes and my 90-degree clamps. Then I covered the hollow base with a solid piece of plywood. I made a mistake here and should have gotten a bigger piece of plywood to cover the entire area, which I did later correct, but I forgot to film it. Anyway, I added the Besta drawer on top of the base and screwed it on, and proceeded to make a faux shiplap door out of some MDF sheets.
Something about you that day, I can still hear the shimmering sound. The hill is near, let's get right up. Walk up to the very top. We couldn't tell the sky from the ground.
To get that built-in look, I wanted to add some of that shiplap paneling to the wall as well. And if you're watching this from the US and wondering why I didn't just get shiplap or even beadboard panels from the hardware store, it's because we didn't have them in Germany. In recent years, there have been some options, but it would have taken a big chunk out of my wallet anyway. This was a more cost-friendly approach, and I could simply stick this single panel onto the wall with some command strips that make it really easy to remove in order to access that vent panel that we need to once a year. Before painting, I primed the raw MDF boards and lightly sanded them 24 hours later. We decided on a soft green color called Bay Leaf Green by Rust-Oleum Chalk Paints, and I spent the evening painting everything while listening to Michael Bublé's Christmas playlist. By this point, I was kind of tired from all the DIY, so I thought I could get away with a simple pillow for the bench cushion, but then Pat said it was really uncomfortable.
Look, that's not really comfortable.
So I got some foam to make a proper bench cushion and achieved a highly satisfied customer.
Perfect.
Let's sit down, it's getting cold. All that glitter is not gold, and you are something I don't wanna miss.
For shoe storage, we ended up getting the IKEA Hemner shoe cabinet because number one, it was on sale, and number two, it only required us to add 2 screws to the wall, which was the perfect solution to hiding this ugly metal box on the wall that we never need to access. To get that vintage look I was envisioning, I added some half-round trim to the doors. Back then, I hadn't yet discovered miter scissors, but I would highly recommend using them when it comes to cutting thinner cuts of trim.
Look ahead, the sea is calm, and I know we've been through a lot, but just wait.
I also added some more decorative trim to the legs of the Hemner's cabinet to bring it from a boxy piece of IKEA furniture to something with more dimension and detail. I lightly sanded the whole cabinet off camera before painting the entire thing in a dark cacao chalk paint. To seal the chalk paint and also really achieve the antique look, I applied some dark furniture wax with an old paintbrush. The last challenge of the entryway was to hide the long electrical panel on the wall. I decided to get the Houvette mirror from IKEA and we hooked it securely onto a screw above. Over 3 years later, I can tell you that this has been a really great solution as it's still super easy to take off to access whenever we need to. To finish the space, we got 2 green tone pendant lamps to complement the green shiplap panels and a cozy jute runner. At the beginning of this year, my husband and I decided to switch home offices. It was the perfect excuse to look back because what's in his current office is actually a culmination of the DIY projects I've tackled over the last 3.5 years. It all started back in 2022 with the Plaza cabinets from IKEA. I didn't want the standard look, so I added thin strips of trim around the drawer fronts and painted the entire unit a soft, warm oatmeal color. I also got 2 pieces of pine boards from the hardware store and stained them to create the tabletops that will go on top of the Plaza drawers. I finished the build by adding these vintage style turned legs and installed some beautiful oak floating shelves to create a cozy L-shaped workspace. Earlier this year, we moved everything over to create what we're now calling the back workstation of Pat's office. I painted both the wall and the drawers a fresh sage green color, which really pulls out the warmth of the stained wood. His main desk also went through a few iterations. Back in 2022, Pat invested in a standing desk frame but still used the old tabletop he had since 2017. 2 years later, I wanted to gift him a new office setup and found a beautiful elm tabletop from the hardware store.
I found that photo in the sofa, and it's from way back in '01. So I guess there's much I never told you. like who I am, who I love, where I've been and where I came from. Grew up on 913 of Blue Rock. Memories of 6 kids running around those halls.
For storage, we brought over the Plaza cabinets from the old office as well. I gave them a complete refresh with a coat of chocolate brown paint. It's a small change, but it really anchors the room and achieves that cozy, earthy aesthetic that he likes. This room is a bit more of a niche area, but it's the most important space in the apartment for me. It's where I make my bread and bring my projects to life. For tool storage, we repurposed the IKEA Eva shelves we've owned since 2017. Over the years, I've customized them with a pegboard and some rattan doors to hide the visual clutter. Since the office swap, I've made a few changes to the Eva shelves, but they still remain a reliable home for all my essential tools and supplies. With more space in my new studio, I also got some Plaza cabinets for a whole wall of storage. For now, I'm keeping them plain white so that they kind of blend into the background. They house my craft supplies, bulkier tools, and those inevitable piles of wood offcuts. I also intentionally left the top right corner open so that I could fill it with pieces of decor that make the otherwise functional space feel more homey. Lastly, my favorite corner of the studio is where I installed this track shelving system. I picked up some tracks and some oak veneer boards from my local hardware store and added a bunch of different lighting. With a new standing desk, I created a similar L-shaped workspace, and this is where I do all my video editing.
If I show up, will you show me around? If I make you laugh, will you give me some time? 'Cause I know that a girl like you.
This apartment comes with 2 bathrooms. The one upstairs is our unofficial guest bathroom, situated right next to the entrance. It has a single north-facing window, which means it rarely sees the sun. One day, I just grew tired of the hospital white walls, so I dug through our leftover paints and chose a dark forest green in order to embrace the moodiness of the space. I had been hunting for a vintage style vanity, but everything on the market was way out of my budget. So I decided to design and build one myself. This was also my first real woodworking project where I built a piece of furniture entirely from scratch. Whenever I would be drying my paint supplies, it would just clutter up the entire bathroom, so I intentionally designed the vanity with a shelf at the bottom for that very purpose. For the countertop, I cut out a hole for the sink to sit on and isolated the boards to prevent any moisture absorption. I also tried routing for the first time to get smooth rounded edges and covering it with plaster to get that raw organic texture. I think I was on a bit of a DIY high at this point. I felt like I could build everything. Before I knew it, I was building a shallow upper cabinet for extra storage above the tub. And some handy peg rails to finish the empty corners of the bathroom. It took another 12 months before I finally worked up the courage to tackle our primary bathroom in the basement. This project was actually sparked by the release of the new Entryway cabinets from IKEA. Our bathroom was always cluttered up by laundry supplies and toiletries until we hung these beautiful cabinets.
Lie awake in the morning with the light upon her skin. Coffee cup before the day begin. Don't go, stay a while, we'll slow it all.
Just like the upstairs bathroom, this one lacked in natural light, so I leaned into the moody tones again. But this time I went to the opposite end of the color wheel and chose a deep rosy mauve.
Time is still and there's nowhere to be. Birds are talking outside, giving space for the words we hold inside to come out. So stay a while, we'll slow it all the way back down.
Building a custom vanity for this bathroom just felt like a natural choice after the first one. This time though, I focused on building deeper drawers for even more storage and added some wallpaper to the bottom as well. For the top, I hacked an IKEA kitchen countertop to get the look of marble without the price tag or high maintenance of actual stone. And this was my reaction when I put everything together. I should tell you now that the one thing that kept me from starting this bathroom sooner was the ugly washer and dryer tower. I couldn't figure out how to hide them without building a massive cabinet that would make the room feel smaller. The solution finally came from an unlikely source: an outdoor fence in a magazine spread. We recreated that slatted look with some thin pieces of trim, then I built a simple frame to hold it all together to create the divider.
You dance around. I can breathe, I can see. When I got your love, when I got your love.
The living room has been one of those spaces that has just been really hard to get right. But before we get into the struggle, let's talk about the win, the coffee bar. The coffee bar sits right between the living room and the open kitchen, making it the very first thing you see when you enter the home. I wanted it to feel special, so I custom ordered these beautiful turned legs from a woodworker in Hungary and paired them with beech plywood from the hardware store.
What if the world had more of your smile? What if the wind could spread your love? What if your sweetness could reach everyone? There'd be no wars.
I spent some time trying to color match the stain to a vintage lamp that belonged to Pat's late grandma because I knew I wanted the lamp to have its own moment to shine here.
Maybe the birds will sing about your heart. Maybe the trees will whisper the word. Maybe the sun.
As for the main part of the living room, we started with the basics, hanging a pendant lamp, some oak veneer blinds, and mounting the TV.
Oh?
How do we do it too easily? Okay.
Then, to add more character to the room, I decided to install some board and batten. I did this in a renter-friendly way using some double-sided tape and painter's tape.
Down in the valley where the roots lay low and the river bends while the water flows, you were laying down with your toes exposed on a rock you found with the morning's warmth. Oh, I'm glad that I found you.
Oh, it's really nice, isn't it?
Wondering if it's a bit too cold.
I think it's alright because we have so many warm elements. We can see if it's too cold, we can paint over it.
As it turns out, Pat was right. The sage green color felt really icy and uninviting. So 2 months later, just in time for Christmas, I repainted everything in a warm oatmeal. Deep in my heart, I think I knew it wasn't the forever color, but it was still a safe middle ground while I figured out the next move. A full year went by and it was once again the December holidays. We removed the floating shelves in the corner to make space for some curtains, but
Oh no!
they packed them in a box that's too small. Yep, the curtain rods had arrived damaged. I've actually been procrastinating the replacement ever since, so we are still curtainless for now. On a better note, we finally found a coffee table we loved, and I had decided to add more trim detailing to the board and batten. I certainly did not expect to have to paint the living room 3 times, but I think we finally made the right decision.
Maybe it's our chance, but either way, you showed me how to reach for the best of myself. It's all good when you show the way, yeah. 'Cause even if I fall, ooh, I trust you'll stay, yeah, stay. And through the dark and cold, I know it's all good, 'cause now I'm the best of tried so hard, stumbling in the dark, to learn how to see what you already saw. You're the one to blame for.
Maybe a bit unconventional, but one of the first decisions we made was to turn the basement into a large bedroom. Most apartments in Germany don't have air conditioning, so sleeping in the basement where the temperature is naturally regulated has proven to be the best decision. Design-wise, this was another long journey. We did the basics like putting up curtains, building our wardrobe, and filling it with furniture, but it was always a work in progress. Then one day, 3 years after living here, I was finally ready to commit to a design. I started with one half of our basement bedroom, which I named the multi-purpose zone. This is where we keep our wardrobe and dresser, but it also functions as a small workspace and an open area for home workouts. I started easy by giving the wall cabinets a familiar upgrade, adding trim to the doors and wrapping the frames with MDF for a more polished inside look.
Dancing slowly in the moonlight, beneath the stars that lit up your eyes. The sweet scent of your skin filled up my lungs with ecstasy. We were so young.
Over the years, I had accumulated quite a few half-used cans of paint, so after discussing with Pat, we decided on a soft blue.
These days are running slow. Sunsets and shores far from home. Headlights are shining on the sea.
To make the most of the space, I got some luxe shelves from IKEA.
And I could try to just follow this way, but I'll never find this anywhere else.
And painted them the same blue to create a seamless, cozy book nook above the dresses. Finally, to finish the space, I made a simple floating frame for a piece of art that I thrifted.
Standing underneath the lights, into each other's eyes. Tired snowflakes are coming down, collapse into water when they hit the ground.
Finishing that half of the room gave me the momentum I needed to tackle the sleeping zone. I had always envisioned a wooden headboard, so I used some painter's tape to visualize the height and spacing on the wall before heading to the hardware store.
Everybody's got a problem that they don't know how to solve. Like life don't make no sense at all. And everybody feels something that nobody feels. Hurting takes some time to heal. Everybody's got someone that they wish they could call. And tears turn into waterfalls, and everything keeps moving, but you're standing still. Hurting takes some time to heal.
We don't actually watch that much TV in bed, but Pat had one big request: a TV for those inevitable sick in bed days. That's it. I had always wanted to build some sort of cabinet to hide the TV away when it wasn't in use. Since I had to carry whatever I built down into the basement, I decided to first build 2 smaller frames and then combine them to make one larger cabinet. I had wanted to challenge my woodworking skills, so this time I chose to build a sliding door. I used the same trim as the headboard for a similar design and got a sliding door mechanism from the hardware store. To pull the bedroom together, we hung some dark green curtains, added a new rug, got proper bedside tables, and finally hung a ceiling lamp.
I've been working so hard to get you out my head, but I can't stop my thinking of the words that you have said. You told me that you loved me, how could I forget? Now it's spinning around inside my head. So I hold on, however long.
Looking back at these past few years, I think of clouds of sawdust, late night painting sessions, the projects that didn't go as planned, and the ones that surprisingly did. Every shelf, every coat of paint, and every custom-built corner holds a memory of our time here. We work here, we play here, and we create our core memories here. This is home.